do have solar panels, but I don't know if they can power something this crazy.
No, not yet. Right? Soon. It's all coming. The Jetsons is going to be a reality.
I'm sure some smart asses thinking
Okay,
about it.
speaking of the Jetsons, what the hell was on the ground? They never showed the ground in the Jetsons.
There is no ground.
There's no ground there.
What are the houses like? They're on poles. What are they attached to?
Little hovering things.
It's like Cloud City.
They're on Earth. There's gotta be a ground.
They're not on
They're
Earth.
not on, yeah. I think that's clear.
Wait, seriously? They're not on Earth?
I don't know. I'm just saying things.
Hasn't broke up between them.
That's what I'm saying. Is there like a fog of nuclear mist down like it's like 20 feet above the ground? You can't go down there.
That's
Like
fantastic.
mutants down there. The
So
dark
funny.
underbelly.
I haven't seen that yet.
That was a good movie.
Telling me.
I saw it twice.
I'm going to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I should see it tonight.
I can't. Well, I probably should see it tonight, but I don't like watching horror movies.
It's like
by
Mad
myself.
Max Fury Road down at the
It would be
bottom.
the shittiest apocalypse. That would be a really bad one.
It's just everyone had to be quiet all the time.
That would be so
Second part
bad.
coming.
The second part is coming.
I mean, they're gonna make one. They don't know the date
That
yet.
would be a very good.
But here's the thing. I was
That'd
scared
be
to even eat my
hilarious.
popcorn in there because it's like you want to stay quiet. Like, I was not scared. I just didn't want to disturb.
The theater was quiet.
Yeah,
It was
it's
the
so
quietest
quiet.
theater I've ever been.
I couldn't hear one popcorn crunch. It was like just me.
That'd
You
be
had to like suck on it and make
hilarious.
it hot.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not doing this.
The privileged
So
few
fun.
up in the
It was a
top.
great movie. Have you seen The Incredibles?
Good morning,
I'm
everyone.
waiting for that today.
Good morning.
We're going to do some fun stuff today.
Do fun stuff every day.
There you go.
Sometimes it's more difficult than others. Today, it's going to be a lot of new stuff, and it's stuff that you're going to see for the first time and maybe the last time, depending on which career path you choose. Today, we are going to give you your first middle tier application technology. So, this afternoon, you're going to build your first full stack application by yourself, start to finish. So, let's go through and understand what pieces we're going to give you. And I was going to pull up that diagram. Might as well do that. Let's see that diagram that says this is each of the tiers. And, well, let's see if I can find it. And it's going to be course content. So, this one. Okay. So, if y'all have been keeping up, and I know you have because you're still here, you've got the front ends. So that was the first few days, a little over a week. And we talked about the web user interface. We talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's down here. And then we jumped over this whole box here, which is vitally important. This is where most of the programmers in the world would say, I'm a programmer because I can do Ruby, or I can do C#, or I can do Elixir. We jumped over all that because we were going to jump up here and kind of on purpose impose a little bit of frustration on you and to break up the type of syntax. SQL, as you know now, we're not going to cover SQL in depth anymore from here on out unless you request it. SQL is a very different animal. It doesn't behave the same way as procedural languages. You don't read it the same way. You kind of write a query and you kind of have to understand the set logic that's going to perform on your behalf. And then you run it, and the good news is it takes a split second usually, and it comes back and says, oh, there are your results. If you don't like it, change it. Modify your query, try again. So it's more like immediate gratification, immediate trial and error. Eventually you get there. But it's not something you can really debug easily. And that's just the nature of the beast. So one of the things that we've purposely kept from you is we didn't want to show you how much or how little real application developers on the job need to know each one of these technologies. And I wanted to pat you on the back a little bit. When we dove into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, Because it's your first time, you're thinking, I really need to know everything and I need to memorize everything. In the real world, how many of the developers out there that have full-time jobs actually know all the methods of a jQuery object that they need to use? Very few. So we took you to, this is competence, and we went further. And I didn't tell you that. But that's why it felt hard, because it was hard. Even for competent professional application developers in this class, they would have been, wait a minute, that's as far as I know. It's like, they're going further. We went further, and we could have gone further still. But we got you to a point where, okay, let's push you to a breaking point, and let's pull you back. And that's on purpose, because you don't know where that line is. You don't know what the standard, the bar out there is in Richmond or Winston-Salem about this is what you need to do to be able to be competent and have a full-paying job in technology. We took you further because why did we hold this course? No, it really doesn't have to do with you.
So you have desire.
So that we can find people for our company. Remember that. Now, as a positive byproduct, everybody gets, this is for me, this is my own career, I'm going to take advantage of that, great. But at the same time, at the start of the day and the end of the day, we're doing this because we need more people for our company. In our company, our bar is up here, it's not down here. So we're pushing a little farther. We haven't got to the Sightsource bar, and you're not going to get there even if we do hire you for a few months, and that's normal. We're going to train you more, though. So we're giving you more than you can handle. Get as much as you can. We're going to come back, especially if you come work with us or really with any other company. They're going to teach you more. Like if you go to work for Inmar, you're probably going to learn some Python. If you go to work for RJ Reynolds, you'll probably dive deeper into C#. Maybe learn some Visual Basic. I don't even know what they do over there these days. So the point here is, and the reason we're exposing you to so many different technologies is to show you that they're all really the same. If you keep your mind on what is an application, this is a modern application. You could fill each one of these 3 big boxes with a different flavor of technology. But at this point, you've seen, 20 languages in 5 days? You're probably not afraid of another language, and that's really the point. So if somebody on a job interview says, you don't have Python, you've never seen it, I'm not sure about you, say, yeah, I've never seen it, but I can pick it up. I picked up JavaScript in 2 days. And that is something, it's like, okay, maybe we should listen to this person on the other side of the interview. And they'll take note of that. Confidence matters. So I want to give you a little bit of confidence today. I'm going to take a step back and say, okay, why did we do this to you? Why are we continuing to do this to you? Because in our opinions, if we were where you are today, in your seat, I would have wished somebody had done this to me. I would have wished somebody could have shown me, give me the whole map. I may not understand how to go to Zimbabwe, but at least I know Zimbabwe exists on the map somewhere. And I could probably find a plane ticket and go there if I wanted to. That's really what we're trying to do here. So if you pick up jQuery and some of the really important technologies, CSS, HTML, and we're going to revisit those, by the way. Just because we cover it for like a week and a half doesn't mean you can forget about it, because your final project, you're going to need a user interface. You're going to have to go back and remember all that stuff and practice and try hard. That's what we're here for at the end. But today, why did I bring this up? We covered the web UI. We covered the database very quickly. We covered it mostly in SQL Server, but we also showed you PostgreSQL and MySQL. And we showed you MySQL on Linux. The point of that is not to confuse, it's to show you that it's really all the same thing. Just because somebody feels better about themselves because they run a crazy relational database on a weird flavor of Unix doesn't mean you can't do it right behind them, because you know SQL. If you know SQL, you got relational databases. You know how to design relational database tables. If you design for an Oracle database on OpenVMS DEX system, a completely different operating system, it's similar to Unix, do you think you could do that? The right answer is yes, because you know how to design relational database tables. Then it's just about, okay, on this operating system, for this flavor of database platform, what are their quirks? How does Oracle say create table? It's probably 99% the same with a different character somewhere. That's about it. And that's really what we're trying to convey here. Take that with you, or if you come work with us or another technology company, it's going to serve you well. So, big picture. We covered the user interface. We covered the database tier. We're going to cover another database today. See this up here in the right-hand corner. These two are non-relational database stores, Elasticsearch and MongoDB. And we're going to give you the first of your middle tier technologies. And I'm going to show you, let me jump into where we're going to end today. And I want to show you, this is why we didn't do it in a different order. If we had shown you what we're going to do today, you're going to get it today. And it's going to be, oh, I've seen JavaScript. I've seen that. I know what he's doing there. If we had shown you this code on day one, you would have run screaming from the building. If you were smart. Because it would have been the wrong thing to do on our part. It would have been, they're not going to get it, and they're just going to be intimidated by what we're trying to learn. And that's not why we're here. We're doing this not to intimidate you, but to challenge you. So let's go through, and I'm going to open this up in Sublime. And this is flash forward to like 1 o'clock this afternoon. And let's do that one. No, I think I've got another one here. This one. Okay. There. So if you saw that on day one, and I started going through, it's like, okay, Mongoose does this, and this is a function, this is an object we're passing to configure that, and let's see this run. Okay, here I'm calling a variable there, and okay, I'm going to gloss over that. Let's just run it, and let's see how it works. If I'd done that on day one, you'd just like, what is he doing? And you couldn't have followed. The reason we did it in this order is that you kind of understand HTML and CSS, which don't have if statements. And now you know, oh, if statements are pretty much everywhere else in the world in programming. You learn JavaScript. What language is this, by the way? Look at the little .js extension. This is JavaScript. This is the core of a node.js application. This is it, right here. One page of code. Now, there's no user interface. This is where you got to switch on a little bit. It's like, okay, middle tier. This is also why we didn't do the middle tier first. Because oftentimes people learn the middle tier first. It's like, why am I doing this? If you see the user interface, that's why I'm doing it. I'm creating an application because I can see the end result. This is where the real logic and heavy lifting happens in the middle tier in pretty much all applications. This is where you connect your database tables and write your queries and execute your queries, and you massage the results into a shape that the user interface wants. That's what the middle tier does. Other applications that don't have a user interface, I think Inmar does a lot of coupon processing. There probably isn't a user interface for a lot of those applications. We've learned about a couple things on Windows that you can do and run your code without a user interface. What are a couple of those? So it just happens, say something that happens every half hour. You want it to happen every half hour from now until the end of time.
Schedule tasks.
Schedule tasks. Task scheduler, you can say, here's my executable, here's my middleware code that we're going to learn how to start writing today. I'm going to tell this task scheduler in Windows to run that every half hour. It's as simple as that. The hard part is writing the code. What's another way to write your code so that, or schedule your code or set up your code so it runs all the time? So nobody has to have a user interface. Thinking about coupon processing, which is kind of a tangent, but
Services.
a Windows service. You can set up a Windows service. On Linux, they have something almost identical to Task Scheduler in Windows, and I think Windows actually stole the idea from them. It's called, anybody know it? It's called cron. It's just a little file that says, these are the scheduled items that I want to happen on this frequency, and it'll just run your code on that frequency. So the power of the middle tier is you don't have to have a user interface. You can use the middle tier to talk to your database tier by itself. And in the case of what they call batch processing, which means you schedule it and it just happens and you see the results in a log file or something, or it sends you an email, there's no user interface. You are the user because you're doing work in the background. It's also called back-end processing. Anyway, so I'm introducing that because the concept of the middle tier is very powerful. And a lot of other organizations would have started there because that is, in all honesty, the most important part of an application. Now, it's going to fail if you do what wrong? If you design your database wrong. Because no matter how good your code is in the middle tier, if you're not storing the data right, you don't have the necessary information. You're going to miss the granularity that they need, or you're not going to capture some information they need. So we're going to talk about Node.js. And without further ado, let's make sure you all have things installed correctly. So let's go and under C Projects Empower, and go ahead and follow along with me here. Let's create a new directory. So you can do this however you want. You can do it from the command line, mkdir. You could right-click, and I'm sure nobody's going to do that. Right-click on here and say, right-click in the white space underneath it, new folder, node 1. Okay, so let's go. So it's C Projects Empower, node 1. Right-click on it, choose Get Bash here. Okay. Now let's verify that you have Node installed, and then I'll explain what is Node and why did it, bless you, cause such a fuss a few years ago when somebody from, I think it was Google, came out with it. Just type that, Node space -V, and press enter. Bless you.
You updated it again.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody's paying attention to the instructions, the stuff, the documentation for today. I changed it twice last night. It was like I dropped it at 6:15 and I had to delete it and add it back at 7:15 because I went through and I built a second application that I'm going to show you today. I built 2 applications. One, I said, oh, that's good. And Harper and I talked yesterday evening. It's like, you know, they really need to see how to use Node against a relational database too. Mongo's non-relational. So, okay, I'll go do that. And I was going through it, and I was using my own documentation to verify it. And I went through it, and since I wrote the documentation like 3 weeks ago, they changed some of the command line switches. They changed the support for some of the ordering. So that the instructions I gave, and I was trying to follow myself, were failing. It's open source, okay? So don't hang your hat on anything staying the same for any period of time, even apparently 2 weeks. So the good news is the core stuff, like JavaScript functions, running JavaScript, is not going to change. How you use that and their preferred way of running applications and their little command line utilities are going to change almost every day, unfortunately. And that's typical of Ruby and Node and the other open source communities.
My version is different than that one.
Yeah, we updated it.
If it's different, don't worry about it. As long as you have something over like 4, you're probably good. They've gone from like version 4 to version 10 or something in 2 years. So, like I said, rapid change. And they're being driven by their user community. When I say user community and I'm talking about Node, who am I talking about? You all, the developers. Developers want the change. They want new things. They want the platform to do cool things. So who's the providers and who's the users? The providers are developers and the users are developers, which explains why it goes so fast. Nobody wants to slow down. So this is, if you don't have a version there when you type in node -V, let me know. We'll have to get you set up. Good. It looks like everybody's running Node. So what is Node? Node allows you to run JavaScript without a browser. That's it. And you're thinking, okay, so what's the big deal? A few years ago, Chrome came on the scene as an alternative browser. And its claim to fame was it could parse JavaScript and present things so much faster. And in the modern web, maybe 10, 15 years ago, things stopped being just plain HTML and CSS. Everybody wanted some action in the user interface. They wanted to do, well, it's longer than that, but it got slower. As people kept adding more and more JavaScript to the browser front end, things started to slow down, because when you have reams of JavaScript that the browser's got to process and present to the user and do events on, you've seen that, you've written some of that code, like jQuery, it slowed down because the browsers weren't up to the task. So some Google engineers got together and said, let's make this better. And they put their best people on it, apparently, and they wrote libraries in a lower level language called C, and they compiled it, and they made it as fast as possible. And they deployed it to the world, and it started out like wildfire, because what do users care about when they're loading web pages? Fast. So if you can pull up a web page, Amazon.com, a big order screen over here, in Internet Explorer, and it takes a second and a half, and it pulls up in Chrome in like a quarter of a second, you're going to throw away Internet Explorer. That's probably the last time you're going to open Internet Explorer for a long time. And that's what happened. So Internet Explorer upped their game. Firefox upped their game. It was a good thing. Competition is good in the market and in technology. So Google set the bar, and they've been running with it ever since. They are still one of the top 2 fastest. I think right now Microsoft holds the title as the Edge browser is a little bit faster. And why does it matter? Because I actually heard this at an Elixir conference. For large e-commerce platforms, companies that sell goods online, they track metrics on page load because they have noticed a strong correlation between a split-second load time difference. Split second over hundreds of thousands of people. A split second longer, and they go somewhere else. They're not going to wait around for a split second. So that split second matters. So the browser matters. The technology used to send data to the browser matters for them. For most people, if you're looking at, I know some of you're building your own hobby sites, split second's not going to matter, okay? But when you're doing big business, it does matter. Now, why am I talking about Chrome when I'm talking about Node? Node is nothing more than a headless version of the Chrome JavaScript engine. So take the best part of Chrome, why Chrome started winning a few years ago, because they wrote some really knockout code that could render JavaScript faster than anybody else on the planet. Somebody, I think it was still in Google, said, you know, that's a great piece of technology. Wouldn't it be great if I could write real applications with that speed in JavaScript? Because everybody in the world already speaks JavaScript because they have to for the browser. And he went off. I don't even know his name. I should actually remember people's names. And he said, I'm going to make it available on the server. So he cut the entire browser user interface out. Said, I don't care about that. I don't care about HTML and CSS. I just care about the JavaScript engine. And he created this thing called Node. And Node will allow you to run JavaScript. So I showed you on like day 1 a JavaScript file. I'm going to go do that. Coding examples, JavaScript. So actually I even have, I went back and I created a little document for you. Look at that. Node, and then you pass it the JavaScript file name. And it executes that JavaScript for you. You know, like the document ready tag? Think about this being just the code in the document ready. That's what we're doing here. We're just running JavaScript from the command line. And a minute, you know, command line, okay, Ali, this is really uninteresting. I'm just going to go home today. No, the command line is actually how you write web servers. Because we'll get into the picture in a minute. But let me run this for you and show you what Node does to show you that it works. So I'm going to open a Git bash here. You don't have to follow along. And inside of here, I've got a file named ex1. Just to remind you what's in there. It's a very simple file. That's it. So you know JavaScript now. Tell me what this does. Let's read the code together, because this is going to be important today. So let's start at the top and walk me through it. So line 1, do we execute anything? No. Why do we not execute line 1?
Because you're writing a function, defining a function.
I'm defining a function. So that says, here's a bunch of code. It's a bundle of code, but you're defining. You're not executing it. Okay? You're saying, I might want to call this later. If you never call that function, nothing ever happens with it. You're just saying, just in case, I might call that later. Doing the same thing here. So nothing happens up to line 9. What's line 9? Comment. So comment doesn't execute. What does that do?
It's setting a function, add to, passing parameters, and then setting it equal to a new variable result.
It's calling the function named add2, and it's passing 2 variables. It's passing a 2 and a 4. So 2 is going to be stashed into a box labeled N1. 4 is going to be stashed into a box named N2. It's going to run that function, so it's going to say, what does that do? What does return mean?
That's what it puts out. Yeah, that's the output.
It means inside the function, I'm done, send it back. We're done now. So what is it doing? It's doing an inline arithmetic calculation. What is that? In this case, what's it going to be? 6. So it's going to send a 6 back. What do we do with the 6? Let's jump back here. We take the 6 and we stash it into a new box, also known as a variable, labeled result. var just says, oh, by the way, I'm declaring that variable named result. So show result. Now you're jumping ahead, naughty developer. So, step by step, we're calling the function named showResult. So what does that do? Let's jump up here. Function showResult. We're passing. What is in the box named result again? 6. So we're passing a 6 in a box named result here. We just happen to name that the same thing. Let's name it X, just to show you that I can rename it. I shouldn't have used the same name. And console.log. This is valuable. You know that console log, really helpful little method? By the way, I'm talking technology again. What is a method?
It's a function that puts on an object.
It's a function that belongs to an object. That's all it is. So this log is a function that belongs to the console object, and the console object is just given to you. The reason this matters, we're running Node, and look at what we've got. We've got the console.log. Now, if you don't have a browser, where does that come out? It comes out in your little Node window. But you can use console.log to debug and iteratively build your JavaScript applications. That's important. So it says there's no return statement. Is that bad?
Well, console.log is kind of your return.
Console.log is going to write something on my console. So Anna is arguing that we didn't really need a return because we had a side effect. That's what it's called. When a function does something useful or negative even, as a side effect of its execution that's not related to its return. That's like, it's normally not what you intend when you write functions, because usually functions you want to think of, I'm going to give it some stuff and I'm going to get some stuff back. The side effects are things that happen as consequence of that you may not have intended. So in this case, console.log is a positive side effect because we really wanted it to write to the console. But we didn't have a return statement. But nobody answered my question. Is it wrong to not have a return statement?
No.
No, I didn't want to return anything, so it's fine. Just jumping ahead. Let's look at I think I have a C# example, and I'm going to come right back here. Don't worry, I'm not all over the place without recovery today. So this is C#, and this is the same thing, remember. Now, I'm going to show you that void, this is jumping ahead. Void means in C#, I'm not returning anything. JavaScript is kind of loose and cool. It's like, okay, whatever. I'm not even going to ask you for what you're going to return. You just don't return. But in C#, I'm returning an integer there. I had to say it's an integer. In C#, if you don't return anything, you just say void, which means I'm not returning anything. Just as an aside. So, back to JavaScript. I save this file. That's the end, so there's nothing else to run. It just finishes. We're done. So really, we're running that line of code. It jumps into the function. Then we're running that line of code, jumps into the function, and we're done. So let's see it in action. So the name of the file, the way you execute JavaScript with Node is just Node. By the way, how does it know to... If you just write Node on anybody's computer, will it magically run JavaScript? You downloaded and installed it, and now your computer knows what Node is. How does it know what Node is?
Because it's something in the executable.
It's in the path statement. Somebody got it. The path statement says, oh, when you installed Node, you installed it somewhere on your computer, and I can probably go find it here. C program files. I don't even know where I installed it. Node.js, right there it is, node.exe. So that C program files Node.js is in my path statement in Windows. The path statement is a list of paths, just file paths, directories, where when you execute something and Windows doesn't know what it is, it's going to go look for it in all of these paths in sequence. And as soon as it finds the match, it's going to use it. So all we're doing is saying, I want you to go run that file. And the path statement makes it easy in Windows to say, go find it. So that's what Node is. And what are we going to pass it? The name of our JavaScript file, which I believe is ex1. Question, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick question to clarify. So Node.js is either, is it just a kind of like a light version of not JavaScript, or does it just run on top of JavaScript?
So the question from Brian was, is Node like a light version of JavaScript, or does it run on top of JavaScript? Node is a JavaScript engine. And on the contrary, instead of being light, it is heavy duty. This is what people write JavaScript in if they're going to write a real application. So the Node developers, there's probably even a holy war in between front-end JavaScript developers and Node developers. The Node developers probably look down on the front-end JavaScript developers, okay?
Going back to the JavaScript, so it's not going to say show result 6, it's just going to show 6.
Yeah, so the question is, why did it just, I just ran it here while we're talking. So node space ex1.js, I just pressed enter, and it came back with a 6. And Bethany's saying, why didn't it, why did it just say 6? Because right here, it said console.log that. Now, let's make it pretty. That's why. Because I just said, give me the value of the box, x here, but I'm going to concatenate with a plus sign in JavaScript. And here's another nice thing. It's not as immediate gratification as SQL, but it's almost there. Because you can come back here on the console, run it again. Immediate. It's like, okay, let me change my code, let me see it. You don't have to spin up a browser, you just do it. Now, that is Node, what you can do with Node, you run JavaScript. So not very interesting, you're still like, okay, did I get out of bed for this? Here we go. Question.
Is there a difference in running Node using the node.exe versus using Git or Git bash, like for inputting and executing and things like that?
So the question is, could I have just opened like a Windows CMD, a command terminal, and done the same thing? And the answer is...
Well, like the actual node.exe over here. That opens up its own command terminal.
Like if you double-clicked on node.exe,
right? Yeah.
It's just another way. It's doing the same thing.
Okay.
Normally, what you do is you use the executable and pass it a file. And the reason you do that is because if you're inside of the node.exe terminal, once it's done, it closes automatically, and you don't want that usually. You want to see, okay, I might want to do something else after.
The Node is just another black box.
Yeah, you're not going to learn the internals of Node. You're going to learn JavaScript to pass to Node. So we're learning JavaScript again. So remember all that JavaScript that some of you is like, thank goodness I never have to go back and look at that again. It's like, no, we're diving deeper into JavaScript today.
Did we use the Windows command terminal?
Yes.
Okay.
The question is, does Node run from the Windows command terminal? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, because it's in the pass statement and it's just an executable on Windows, this is Windows command terminal. If I do node -v, right there it is. I don't know if it'll do this. Let me see. Nah, it didn't like that. There's probably a way to do that. But that's not really how you use it anyway.
First, I guess you have to get into Node from command line.
Yeah, I'd have to create a script or
Yeah, it
something.
doesn't like it if I do that.
Yeah, it's like a batch
Get
file.
either.
Yeah. So let me show you, and I want you to actually write your first JavaScript Node web server. So I've explained what Node is and how it fits in the ecosystem. And I've told you why it kind of broke the world when it came out a few years ago. Why was it such a big deal? Because you have all these frustrated JavaScript developers that worked in the browser, and they were really good at JavaScript because they've been doing it for years. But they were not allowed to write any applications in the middle tier. They couldn't talk with the database. They couldn't do things that would run in batch. They always had to have a browser because the browser was their container. This liberated them. And not only were they liberated, it spread. So all the other people had said, oh, if I, like you all, you look at the big picture and you think, I've got to learn JavaScript anyway because I've got to do the browser stuff. Do I really want to go through the trouble of learning another language to do the middle tier? Some of them said, no. I'm just going to learn JavaScript really well, and I'm going to use it on both tiers. So I can do almost everything. As a matter of fact, you're going to see with MongoDB, guess what language it talks? JavaScript. You can do everything with one language.
Okay. So is this why some applications you don't need to connect to the internet to do them?
No. So the question was, is this why some applications you don't need to connect to the internet to use them? No. That just means it's running on your local computer. It doesn't have an internet connection. So let's take a look at this. This is an entire Node web server.
Allie, can you explain to them how Node will only run files if you're in the folder so that they understand
Bot.
Oh, path. Oh, yeah. Okay, let me back up. On day one, we covered the basics of paths. Let me show you this. So let's go back. I'm going to go to day one, coding examples, and JavaScript here. So the reason that worked and it could find things is because I'm going to open git bash here. And what's the commands I can use in the command line to say, show me what's in this folder? It's either ls or dir. ls is for Linux flavors. And see right there, it has two files. If you want to see it, you can pass a command line parameter. It's like, okay. ex1.js is that first one. And then it has another one, how to run JS with Node. So the file is actually sitting in this same directory. So that's why when I say node ex1.js, it knows where it is. If I were up one directory, how do I say go up?
And then the name of the file.
Yep, so I'm up one directory, and you can see it changed there. I'm going to go up one more. So now, how do I say run that? I still say node, but now I have to tell node where my file is. So I'm going to say, what's the full path? What's the relative path from where I am in day_1 down to that file? What's that?
You don't need the CD. You start
It
typing
just
that path.
the relative path.
So coding dash example.
And we're in the Linux flavored bash, so it's /.
JavaScript.
And what's the name of the file? There you go. Now, if I just said ex1.js, it's going to say, I have no idea where that file is. Can't find the module. Doesn't know where that is. So that's paths. That's why on day one, and you need to revisit that. I didn't expect you all to get it on day one, but that's one of those things that you need to pound into your brain. You need to understand path statements, like this thing right here. They're everywhere. C, projects, Empower, course content. Is that a relative or an absolute path? It's an absolute path. Why is it called absolute? It starts from the root of the drive. In Windows, we have them everywhere too. This up here, that's a path. If you click on it up here, it says, oh, what's the difference between Windows paths and Linux paths? The slash. Windows uses the \, Linux uses the /. Mac, a Unix variant, uses the /. So pretty much everybody except Windows in the world uses /. The internet, /, URLs, /. Okay, so it's all paths. So get comfortable with that. If you're not comfortable with paths, go take a tutorial, ask questions. You need to kind of understand. Once you get it, it clicks, it's going to make a whole lot more sense. So a lot of things in computers are talking about how do I get from here to there with a relative path. So any other questions about paths or what we're doing here? Okay. So now getting back to your first web server. Let me close out a bunch of things. That's it. That is a fully functional web server. You don't believe me? Watch this. So this is in simplest web server. Let's go run it. Day 13. And this is where that guy who came out with Node, he would go to presentations and he's like, here's a web server. And it's like 4 lines of code. And people would give him a standing ovation. Because a web server is a really complicated piece of code. And I'll explain, we're going to review. Remember the HTTP verbs that we talked about in like day 1? What are the 4 verbs that we normally use? Get, post, delete, and put. So those 4. Simplest web server. How am I going to run this? I'm going to right-click on simplest web server here. And actually, if you pull down course content, you have this code. If you don't want to retype this, and I wouldn't because I'm lazy, just pull it down. How do you pull down Git code? Git pull origin master from the root of course content. So I'm going to right-click here, Git bash, and that's the path I'm in, simplest web server. How do we run a Node application? We just say node, and then the name of the file. Okay, that's lackluster. It's like, okay, I'm still thinking about going home, Allie. So why is that important? Let's look at the code and what it did. Create server. This is how you say, I'm going to use that library in Node.js. Okay? Require. We're saying, put that into a variable, so we're going to use it, and it says, oh, create web server, create server function. What are we doing here? What is that thing it's passing as a parameter? You've seen it in jQuery. It's a function. You're passing the whole function as a parameter. You know, like a click event in jQuery? It's the same syntax. What you're doing is you're defining an anonymous function that says, oh, when you create the server, I want you to run this code. It's a callback function that you're defining here in line. So it's giving you a request and a response. Think about the web server mantra. So we talked about web servers briefly on like day 1 and day 2. How does a web server work? I'm not talking about the computer. I'm talking about the software that runs on the computer. So when you go to google.com, walk me through the steps. So let's refresh our memory because we're building a web server here.
You don't have to Google request the name of what
It doesn't go to Google. You type in google.com. What happens first?
Goes to the server.
It goes to the DNS server.
DNS server. We have to go look up. Google.com means what IP address.
Right.
It gets the IP address.
Then it goes to Google and it says, do you have this file? And the server says yes or no. And if it does, it hands it back.
Yes, so Brian walked to, he said this, and he's right because I didn't fill in some of the details there before. He said it gets, you go to DNS, you get the IP address. IP address will take you to the server that is that IP address. That'll be the google.com server, the physical server. And then the physical server says, they're talking to me over what port by default?
80.
80 is the HTTP. Great. You all are with me. Port 80, and it says, okay, if anything is listening on port 80, when I say listening, it's a piece of software that does nothing in life except wait for requests on port 80. That is your web server software. So request here, that is the request coming from the internet. That's your get, put, delete, post, and anything else you want to pass there. That's your request for the file if you're going to Google. What is your response? What is that?
The web server software comes back to you.
That's what you want to send back. So you're getting the request. This is your code receiving a request from a URL on the internet. You got to decide what to do with it and send back. You could say, I don't like you, I'm not going to respond to you. You could throw an error, you could send a file, you could do whatever you want. You could call a database, read some records, and render an HTML web page. That's what a web server does. So let's take it line by line here. Console.log. Do I need that? No. I could even make this one line shorter. But if I did that, when you get a request, we're not going to see the request and what happens. So since this is a function, does that run immediately? No. That function right here, the parameter, does not run immediately. Just like before we said add two numbers, we're saying when you get a request, call this function. And we haven't made a request. So look at what we got out. We said we just launched a Node web server on local port 8888. Why 8888? Oh, you get to choose whatever port you want right there. It says listen. Listen is, what's it called? In this case, it's just a method. Listen takes one parameter. It takes several, but one in its simplest form. Listen on port 8888. And then, what are we doing? We're writing out to the console. Now you're going to get excited now. I promise. We just made a request to our own web server. And how do we know? This thing is still running. Notice it didn't come back. It said, oh, you requested with a get. Why is it a get? Because we went to just a URL. And by default, when you request things, I'm using, I guess it's saying, oh, normal sites have a fave icon, which is that little icon you see up in that one. And if you don't have one, you have a little eye. So fave icon, if you want to have a customized icon for your website, you just put a faveicon.ico and it'll browsers know to go fetch it. So that's what it's trying to do there. So can we do other things? At the break, I want you to download Postman because it's going to be useful. Postman is a little utility that says, if you have, I think I put it in the instructions, maybe as like one of the optionals. Postman allows you to pretend to be a client. So it allows you to do the HTTP verbs to whatever URL you want. Because it's kind of hard. You have to write some jQuery or something to do a post or a delete. I just want to test my code. So Postman allows you to do that. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to close these out. So when it comes up, it's going to look like this. Okay. And I'm going to close it without saving. Fine. So now, that's what it comes up like. It says, okay, what do you want to do? You have the HTTP verbs up here. And not a very friendly user interface. Okay. HTTP verbs. I don't want you to go up. I want you to go down. I guess it's not used to 200 by 50 pixel resolution. Okay. Let me change that for just a second so I can actually see things. There we go. So, get, post, put, delete. These other ones, technically they exist. You don't use them. Don't worry about them. You got 4 that you care about. What Postman does, it allows you to say whatever URL, and what's our URL? By the way, when you're saying, I want to talk to a different port, localhost means my computer. You can do : whatever port you want to talk to. If you leave that off, what port do you get? 80. So if I left that off, I don't have anything running on port 80 on this computer, I don't think, so I have to specify, I want to talk to that port. It's like switching the channel on the television. So, and why am I talking there? Because my node server, remember over here, this is still running. Notice it didn't come back. It's waiting. It's listening. So we're going to go over here. Let's go to Postman, and let's do a post. And I'm going to post directly to that URL. And normally, what do you do with a post? You send data. So let's send some data. I'm going to do raw JSON. Okay. So I'm going to throw, this is like a little payload of data that I'm sending. Remember $.ajax? Remember the little data where you can send data? That's what I'm doing here. But I'm doing it without having to write any code. That's what Postman does. It allows you to interact with the web server's API without having to write jQuery or something to actually do the post, put, or delete. Gets, you just do it on the URL line. The others, you have to actually write some code or do this. So watch over here. Node is listening. Send. This is the response. This is what it said. Oh, it knows it's a post. So it's probably not earth-shattering to you, but this allows you to do so many things. This alone, these 6 lines, 7 lines of code, and a couple of them are comments, allow you to receive a web request and respond however you want. Let's take the next step. So if you want to rewrite that, feel free. I mean, it's like 4 or 5 lines of code. Write your own web server, feel free. You can change the port here. Just change that parameter to whatever you want.
How do you know which ports are safe so that you don't clobber something going on?
Good question. Kathy said, how do you know which ports to choose or which ones are safe? In Windows, usually you don't want to use anything below, I think it's 4,000. Those are like system utilities, like email and like, what is it, 3306. Different applications like to stake their claim on a certain port. Like SQL Server is, I forget it now. I hadn't used it in so many years. But there's a certain port that, okay, this is my port. And everybody else in the world kind of knows, I'm not going to try to talk over that port because you can only listen and talk and own the port for one application. So if 2 things try to listen to the same port, watch this. If I change this to, what's one that I know? Like 25, I think, is SMTP, which is email. So if I kill that. Oh, by the way, how do I stop that? Control C. And it's actually lying to me now. It's not port 8888. It's listening on port 25 because I hard-coded that. I should have made it a variable. Looks like port 25 is available, but if you want to see which ports are available, Harper is actually an MCSE. What's that?
You have to save it first.
Save what first? It's like this file?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saved it. Control S. So let me go look. What is it? Netstat? I'm not a networking guy. Netstat minus A, maybe? There we go. So let's find a port that is occupied. So, yeah, there's on my computer.
Said 1433 is SQL.
1433, yeah, that's SQL. So let's take a look at, let's find one that's occupied and see what happened. Yeah, there's 1433. So 1433 is used. So let's do that. So I'm going to save that, and let's go back and run that app. It says it's 1433.
Oh, so you console outside, so it's going to do it anyway.
Doesn't work. You know what happened is, who just heard my request? SQL Server. SQL said, oh, I see what you want, throw it away. I don't speak web. It's looking for a query. That's how SQL Server is listening. So Node is not throwing an error, it just doesn't know that it's not really listening because something else has that port. The point of there is, to Kathy's question, anything over 4,000, and there are certain apps like Ruby, I think is 3,000 for development.
React is 3,000 too.
Yeah, and there's 4,000, I think is, 4,000 is Elixir maybe, and there's 4,200 for Angular. So different apps, different technologies like to stake their claim on a certain port. Just don't worry about it. Usually anything over 8,000 is safe. So 8,000, 8,001, you've got hundreds of thousands to choose from. So choose something over 8,000. So
How high do they go? What's your max?
it goes into the tens of thousands, but I've never used anything over, I mean, because I have 8,000, I use 8,080 or something like that. So I never have gone over 9,000, I don't think. Okay, so a web server. What are we doing here? You've got a web server conceptually that's listening to a port on a server on the internet. It gets requests from the internet, get, put, post, delete. Let's do something useful with that. Okay. Let's take a look at our next example. So example routes, I'm going to open that in Git Bash. And how do I run Node? You just say Node, and then the name of the file you want to execute. Node app. I don't think you have to say the JS, and you don't. It just says, okay, I'm Node. I know you're going to talk JS, so you can leave the JS off. So now it says, started on port 8077. How do I talk to that? Localhost 8077. Index page called. Not very exciting. Let's go look at what this is doing. Okay, now we got a lot more code in here. That HTTP server example I showed you is, yes, it works with no frills, no decoration. The downside is, in a real-world web server, you want to do more than just, I got your get, I got your post, I got your put. You want to actually send HTML files. You want to send images. You want to, when they post a form or you get JSON data, you want it given to you as variables. You don't want to see the raw text. If we didn't do anything except use that very simple, bare-bones Node web server, you'd have to write all that code yourself. And immediately it's like, okay, that's cool, guy, but let me go make this real world useful, is what a bunch of developers got together. And they said, let's build something called Express. Express is a very lightweight web server that runs on Node. It's that same thing we saw, except it augments it with a whole bunch of other features, like when you post a form, when you have first name, last name, it will convert that into variables. And it'll give you the ability with a very nice routing file. Static. Actually, it's all inside of here. When you say go to home, that's what that means. When you say get, like I want the get HTTP verb, at this path, home, then I want to look at the parameter you pass me. Query param1. Now, still I'm not responding very exciting, but what this allows me to do is you can take parameters from requests, either posted from a web page or sent through JSON APIs, and we can use it to query a database or decide if we want to respond a different way. You have all the power of JavaScript here. So this is actually running right now. I left this running. So it's running on port 8077. I'm getting you used to, this is the Node workflow. You start your web server. It is running with the last saved version of the files you've run. To use it, now you've got to put your front-end developer hat on. You've got to go over here to the browser and it's like, okay, how do I hit my routes? Now, we're going slowly, but soon you're going to have a fully fledged web page and a web application running in the full stack.
Can you make it bigger again?
Yeah. Yeah, we're not using Postman now, so we can make it bigger. Homepage call with no query string parameter. So you can pass parameters on the get. That's how you pass parameters in a URL string. Show you the routing. So how do you get information? Instead of just, they went to this path, I want to see what they wanted. So you can have different routes. When I say app.get in Express, that means when I receive a get HTTP request, which is like the query string, or a normal get from JSON, from $8.ajax, at this path, wherever you're running, / whatever path, at home, it says, oh, it gave me a nice little variable. It said req.query, that means the query string, .param1. That means that's what that is. Param1 equals ABC. So it responded with this, query string parameter ABC. Let's see the code that does that. req.params.param1. Does everyone understand what's going on there? Because we're going to build on this very, very quickly.
Can you restate?
So restating that. So what we've got is when we hit our URL, at the very top level, it was just this, 8077. And it said index page called. Why did it do that? Let's go look at the code and figure it out. So it says, all these things are just configuration. It says, which port do you want to run on? That's why it's on 8077. If I change that, it'll be on a different port. This says, I want to be able to process information passed to me as variables. Body parser, it means the body of the post. Views, that's where you're going to see, oh, I can do some real things here. Views allow you to render HTML and CSS from your server. That's in here. We'll get there in a second. By the way, if you want to send back just files, like your CSS files, there's a directory here called static. Okay? And there's an HTML page, index-page. So if we want to get that page from our web server, how do we do that? How do you get there? It's HTML. Okay. So that may not seem like a whole lot, but that doesn't happen automatically. That's a web server responding to your request appropriately. So that's static content. You don't get that for free when you do just the normal, very simple 6-line HTTP web server. Express is saying, you know, if you're going to have a directory and you want to have files that we're not going to make dynamic, we're not going to have to decide what to do with the request, just give them the file. Let's have a directory called static, which means, yeah, you can have the file. So how did it get there? We said that. The static subdirectory, this is an environment thing in Node that says my current directory. So it says path.join. What do you think that does? Path, look what we did up here. We have a library called path. That's a JavaScript library that says I want to be able to work with system paths, like finding files and directories, easily. So it has a bunch of functions, just a big bag of functions, that allow you to work easily with path statements and to build paths like this. One of those functions is named join. And it says, take my current directory, the root, and I want to add the views subdirectory, which is right there. So this is the root. There's the views. Oh, where are my static files? It's in my static subdirectory right there. So if somebody requests anything in that folder, I'll give it to them. Okay, so
do you explain how the dependencies on the node modules are installed and called in the app?
So the question is about dependencies and how do we get that set up. The answer is it's probably like a 10-15 minute discussion, and I am going there next. That's package management with Node Package Manager right here. So we're going to talk about how all these libraries came in. It's not like you copy or use Git to get it. Because everybody uses Node didn't want to go through the trouble, they made a nice little utility that said, I just want to type a very simple command, and I want it to take care of it for me. I don't want to go find the Git repository. Just give it to me, put it in my project, and I can move on and focus on developing. So it's actually nicer than doing JavaScript in the browser. We're going to get there in just a second.
Harper has a question. He wants to know if you can put a parameter as a, yeah, just.
Yeah. So questions. Okay, so let's see the two different routes. I actually have that route defined. So what we're doing here, let me take a step back and explain what these things are doing. When I say app, let's look up here. There's no magic. App means, oh, remember Express? I just told you what that is. That's a very simple augmented Node.js web server. We're going to go call the function called Express and get an object called app. So app is what we're saying. Express, when somebody sends a get to the root, that's what that means, / I want you to do this. Home route. What do you know? It passes us two objects. What do you think those things are? Request and response. That's all it is. And it says, oh, I just want to send back some very plain text, not even HTML. We're too lazy to even write HTML there. So res.end, index page called. So if I go to the root, and that was really the point of this discussion. Appreciate Harper pulling me back. Index page called. That's why that comes up. Because if we go to the root, it says, oh, I want you to run that function. We know now that you can write that function in line, or you could just name the function, have it called later. There are two different syntaxes for the same thing.
And the root?
Root means there's no path after. I just went directly to that port. That's what it means. Do you have a follow-up, or does that make sense? Well, so the root, when I'm calling the root, let me map that. So when somebody on the internet, in this case on our local machine, makes a request to that port, the DNS and everything, it finally gets to us. It's given to our Node.js application. Node.js says, okay, what path inside of my application, what route should I supply to them? It looks at only the piece after the name of the server. So localhost :8077 here, it's going to say, that's going to get me to my application. It's also known as just /. That's like the top. It's like, think of it as like a directory on your disk. The application's root directory is everything at the top level, and then it looks down as a relative path. So the subdirectory would be like home. Or, so in this case, we just saw that we could type in that / index-page.html. So why did that come up? Because it said, go to the root, and Node.js says, is that a static file? That static subdirectory here is mapped to the root if you're looking for a static file. The root of the application. So this says, if it's not a static file, if I type in anything else that is not found as a file in here, then this is how I'm going to decide what to do with that request. And I'm going to give you this request object that's populated with all the stuff they sent you, if they sent you anything. And this is the function that you use to say, this is what I'm going to do with that request. So that's a route. And this is actually, this is taking a little bit longer than I thought, but I realize now why. We haven't talked about the middle tier at all. And for me and Harper and other web developers, like, oh yeah, you're not, you know, it's like, because you're going to see this 20 more times, 20 different ways. We talk about Angular and TypeScript, same thing. We talk about ASP.NET, MVC, and C#, same thing. They have what's called routes. So the application route is you get to the server, the web server, and then it says, okay, what are they asking for? They look at, for whatever you pass after here, as, oh, this is what they want. So if I type in home, it went to a different place in my code because I requested a different path. Why did it go? It says, well, it tries to match, and it finds the first match. Is it at the root? No, they passed something there. Let me see if I can figure that out. Oh, there. They passed home. And I'm saying get here. I could have easily said post.
So how does it know, so it just can access all the files that are in the path that's home?
So the web server, what we're writing here, Node.js, has access to everything in it from its root down below, yeah.
Okay, so whatever's in that file, in the Node.js file.
Node.js is your application. So there's a little confusion about how is it finding all these files. Node.js is listening on the port, and it is just running. It's still running right over here. So this thing right here. I don't have any console log statements, so you don't see what it's doing. But it's just listening on that port. So anything that comes as a request on that port, it's got to decide what to do with it. So it's going to say, do I want to give it a file? Do I want to give them a static file? Maybe. If it matches a static file in this static subdirectory, I'll give them a file. If it's not, let me look at the HTTP verb they're passing. Is it a get, put, post, delete? And let me see if I have a route for that. These are called routes because you're kind of requesting a path, an internet path, and it looks at that and it says, okay, what do I want to do with that? And it gets to decide. Your code gets to decide. Do you have a follow-up question? Or Brian, maybe we'll get it there in a second.
Well, I guess mine's a little bit different, is that you set this up on your local host or a local host. And that would be for you to use this web server, but is there a way and or even a reason why somebody else would be able to call up the same web server and make calls to it and requests?
Okay, I think you all are you're right that close to having it click. It's like Brian's like, well, you're running it on your local computer. Do you expect everybody to kind of connect to your computer? It's like, no. This is why I'm doing this. I'm showing this as a local computer because I'm a Node.js developer. Nobody else in the world runs a Node.js server on their local computer except Node.js developers. And why do they do that? Because I don't want to develop on the live internet and have everybody see my mistakes. I'm going to get it working locally, and when I'm done, I'm going to copy and paste these Node.js files, which are really small, by the way, and I'm going to put it on a web server under a real DNS and URL. So what I'm doing here is I'm pretending to be the server side and the client side.
So can you explain to us?
For your
This is the typical web development. You have to pretend to be the browser side and pretend to be the web side on one computer. But nobody would ever touch this except me. When I'm done, I would take the server side and I'd put it somewhere and share it with the world.
Sort of like when we were.
Can you tell us like what happens when you publish it, when you're not doing the developing on your local computer anymore?
What happens then?
Yeah.
identical to what's happening here. That's why I'm testing it like this. So how do you deploy is maybe your question. The way you deploy is, once I'm done with the app, I have a folder full of just that stuff. And it's like, how big is that? It's less than 4 megabytes. I would copy and paste that 4 megabytes, and I'd put it on a server. And then you remember that on first day in Richmond and in Winston-Salem, you all set up a DNS, like your own website, and you told it that IP address goes to that server, and this DNS matches this IP address, and that will resolve to this server in the cloud. I would just point it to my server that's hosting my Node.js app.
So is Node.js kind of like the web server software that's...
Node.js is a web server software. That is exactly right. But it's only one of many. Node.js is web server software that runs on JavaScript. That's exactly right.
What other web server?
Let me show you a web server. And so you actually have one. You're running Windows. Everybody except Emma is going to be able to do this. Let's see. I'd like to rename it. IS. Come on. Where did I put that? They hide it in every version. Internet Information Server. Let's see. Where is that link? Harper, what's the command? IS console inet mgr mgr. That's
That's really helpful what you wrote there about it being similar to a routing table.
Windows. It is a route, yeah. So what is the command? Come on. I normally have it down here, and actually I probably do. It just slipped off because I've got a huge resolution. Yeah.
So that's for Apache.
What's that?
That localhost host is for Apache.
IS console commands. Come on.
Just add localhost.
What does he use? Yeah. Come on, Microsoft. Damn it, I'm going to use their menus. Administrative tools. Okay. You beat me, you hit it well enough. Computer management system. You know what? I may have never installed it here. Yeah, that's what it is.
You can check, just add localhost.
That is well.
Yeah.
Harper just asked if you had.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, that command works for me. No, I probably had the right command. I just haven't used Internet Information Server on this computer.
It is well hidden.
Yeah. Okay, so I am not going to show you Internet Information Server right now, but that is the web server that comes with Windows. So that is, the ASP.NET runs in IIS. IIS is Internet Information Server. So I'm going to install it at the break and I'll show it to you. It has a nice user interface, not buggy at all, like some of the other database consoles we saw yesterday. It is really nice and it's very powerful. It's been around for 20 years plus, and it's solid. They're on version 10, I think.
What's it called again?
Internet Information Server, IIS for short, because developers love their acronyms. So we will install it. I think I purposely, I thought I had installed here, but I purposely didn't put it on the install list because it's so important that I expected either Derek or Paul to take you through the installation. And that is, it's not code, but you need to know how to configure it well, because all of the .NET and C# stuff that you do on the internet, you put it in there, and that is your web server. So in .NET world, you don't write your own web server. You use a web server to run your code, which is a little bit different from the way they do it with Node. Node, they create the web server and they create the code. So yeah, the answer, short answer, that was a very, very long answer, and fumbling around to find IIS to answer your question. Yes, this is a web server. There are other web servers. Elixir uses something called Cowboy, I think. There's Apache Tomcat. There's all kinds of web servers out there. What do they do? Somebody tell me what a web server does.
Makes requests and serves up what is being requested.
That's Brian, let me repeat his answer, which is correct. It accepts requests from the internet in the terms of HTTP verbs and paths, and it sends back appropriate responses. How does it do that? Normally, it calls an application, or it runs your code to decide what to do with the request and send something back. That is a web application on the back end. So we actually saw a web server yesterday. It was like a split second, but I showed you on the Linux server running our API voting. There was a web server doing that. It wasn't Node. It was one that comes with Linux, and it's a popular one these days. It's called Nginx, Nginx. All it does, it takes requests, decides what to do with it, and sends it back. Question?
So to be clear, sorry, but just to be clear, so your server, internet server, or your web server sits in the middle where the browser makes requests from it, and you can write requests from the database, or it makes requests from the database through this middleware that makes the whole function of the stack run.
Kind of. Brian said something I'm not going to repeat because it's going to confuse people. So he's trying to work it out in his head, like, how does this work with the database? Let's look at this diagram. So we've seen jQuery. We've seen HTML and CSS. That runs in the browser. You've seen that. We've seen the database. We designed databases. We put data into them. We are here now. So how does it get from the browser to your web server to your database? Here is the anatomy of a simple web request. Somebody types in a URL, which is going to be what type of HTTP verb, by the way? Get. Type a get. It goes to a web server piece of software. Today we're learning about node.js. Node.js says, okay, I see your request. What am I going to do with it? In a real application, and you're going to do this afternoon, it sees the request. Oh, you want to execute a query. You have some SQL defined in your JavaScript in Node.js, and you send that SQL as part of your application code in the middle tier to your database. You get the response back, and then you decide, I've got a bunch of rows. Let me format that into HTML or some JSON, and it sends it back to your browser request. That's how it works.
So Ruby and .NET and Node.js, they speak or they translate the request into SQL? To speak to the SQL server?
There's no translation from the request. So Anna said, do they translate these web requests into SQL? No, you translate them into SQL. That's what developers do.
Oh, I mean after the code is written. So like.
It just runs your code. You can do whatever you want.
I mean the developer writes the code that translates it into SQL. So
she's hoping that there's less code to write in the future. And the answer is no. There's a bunch of code to write in the future. So she's saying, so the web request comes in, and you get the web request, and there's a translation of SQL, and you get the data. That translation of SQL is you write code to execute a query of your own. You get the results back, and then you write code to send back HTML or CSS so the browser understands it. So that's your code. Another question?
The web server just goes out and gets it and hands it back to the browser.
Think of a web server as nothing more than a traffic cop. It says, I get this request, what am I going to do with it?
It tells me where to go get what you're looking for, and if I can get it, I get it.
So the web server doesn't know anything about SQL. All the web server knows how to do is tap your code on the shoulder. It's like, I hope you know how to speak SQL.
Get it and hand it back.
So what's doing the translation from the get to getting SQL and then sending that back? Is it
You're jumping to the end of the day. So Anna's really focused on, I need to get to my SQL. It's like, you do, but you need to understand the request coming from the browser first, and then we're going to write code. And that's like all we're doing today. We're going to translate those requests into something that is going to be a database query. We're going to receive that query results back, and we're going to send appropriate HTML, CSS back to the browser. We're getting there. You're just jumping to the end. Okay, so this is good stuff. This is all the stuff that you're asking questions about and kind of struggling with right now is vitally important. I've said before that you need to get like 60, 70%. You need to get 100% of this discussion. And this is a part of the discussion where if you're not in a full stack developer class, they don't even talk about it. You just kind of wonder for years until you figure it out on your own. So this is how it all fits together. So ask questions. You need to understand what's going on here. The mechanics, not the code. Ask questions.
Sorry, and that slide to the second image, is that what we're looking at? Because I'm, visual like that. It made me understand a little better. Is that? It was a direct one.
This?
Direct message to you.
Yeah. Let's see. What have we got? Web browser user, browser request page containing form. This could be any of the 4 common HTTP verbs. It's not just gets. Right now we just saw a get because that's what you get on the URL. No. This is where it goes bad.
Step 2, so
yeah.
Never mind.
All right.
This is, it doesn't have to create an empty default form.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want with a request. So that's the power. I mean, it's kind of scary to be thrown in the middle of the ocean. It's like I could go any direction. That's where you are. You've got a request. It's completely up to you to do with it what you will. You've got a request. That's all that's required here. Now, oftentimes, what you do is you query the database. You get some results. You format it nicely into HTML and CSS with the rendering that we're going to see, and you send it back to the browser. So some of the rest of this, I'm sure, is correct. So it says...
I think it's just an example of what you can do.
Okay.
Visually, like how it works.
Oh, so this is a specific example of this is how it works for a page, maybe.
Right.
Okay, so you create... That's not right, the way it's said.
Ignore that.
So it goes... So you send something back to the browser sees it. Now, user populates, update. What if you don't have a form like this? You don't have a form. So this is the result. So this page is, we receive the request up here. Browser requested by typing on the URL line. We had a get. The node.js server received the request, and it decided what to do with it. It decided what to do with it over here. It said, oh, at the root, which means just there's no path to it, I want you to run this function. Request. We didn't even look at what you requested. We're just going to ignore it. It's like, okay, I don't care what you call for. I'm just going to always give you this. If you want to make this pretty, here, let's make it an HTML file. You would never do this. Let's see. This is not the right thing to do, but I'm showing you what we're doing. This is like the context of what we're doing. That is semi-valid HTML, okay? So I'm going to stop this, start it again, and now if I go to the home route, which is just the root, it's going to say, there's a request. I don't even care what the request was. I'm ignoring it. I'm always going to give them the same thing back. So it doesn't have to be text. It can be HTML. And what is it? Just HTML text? Your browser knows how to take care of itself with HTML and CSS. So you can send anything you want back. That's the power here. So that's why I disagreed with this diagram over here. It's that you're kind of locking us in to try to understand it, but I'm not going to let you lock yourself in because you have all the power in the world to do whatever you want with that request. You could give them a form. They could populate it. Post, yeah, you could click on the little submit form. It would post. From the web server, it doesn't care how it got there. I could use Postman to post. I could use jQuery to post. I could click on the submit button on an HTML form and post. Doesn't matter. It's going to see it the same way. When it gets the post, it's up to the web server to decide what to do with it. Validate data. Bad developers don't validate their data. You know, that's a good idea, but it's up to you. You have the responsibility. So yeah, this is a very, very simple. This is normal web form, your contact me form. This is how a contact me form would work, okay? But, contact me form is not very exciting. So, let's see. Do you have, we will be using IIS Lite, IIS Express. Yeah, so IIS Express, there are lots of web servers. What do? They're traffic cops. They listen to, I've got an HTTP request of some verb, and I've got a path on it, and I might have some data passed along with it, if it's a post or a put or a delete. I'm going to give it to my application. It's my application's problem to do something with it, and send back a response. So let's look at what that looks like. So the home route, that means at the top level, there was no path. If I type in, that's very poorly named. I should call it the default route, because I have a home path. So default means, top level. Home, this is actually the function that runs when I type in /home. Now, if I say param1 is equal to whatever, I can get it as a variable on my request object. So it looks like, that's a JSON object. You've seen JSON before. It's giving you, it's already parsed whatever the request was, and it's handing it to you. Here you go, application developer, do what you will with it. Now, Harper's request from like half an hour ago was this. You can have multiple routes. What does this say? This is Node.js routing syntax that says, if they typed in home, and they have something else after it, just like that. Let's take that and make a variable for you as part of the URL. So let's do that. So if I type this in, cannot get Gwaltney because there's no route for that. There is a home page called with URL parameter. How did that happen? So I typed in home. So if I type in the root, it says, I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing there. I didn't define a route for a get that said Gwaltney. There's not going to be one called Empower either. But if I say home, now there's something there. Why did that work and the other one didn't? Because over here it says home, anything they pass after home, I'm going to try to make a variable for you, named that, and I'm going to put whatever they passed into that variable for you. And I'm going to give it to you as here's a parameter value already populated. Do with it what you will.
Yes? How specific can you get with the routes? So, for instance, my understanding is a route is like in specific HTML page, right? So if you're creating a website, you have your home, about, and contact pages. That could be specific routes. Could you have this call or have a route to a specific object within the page? So say I have my HTML page that I've written, and I have a specific div. Could I have a route to the div?
You're mixing paradigms. Scott, I'm going to answer your question, and I'll repeat it for the benefit of Richmond because if somebody else are confusing things. So he's saying, how specific can my route be? Let's go back to this image. He's asking, can a route be specific to a certain div on a page? There are no divs, there are no pages on the web server. We are in this tier. This doesn't speak HTML or CSS. There are no divs. So the route, to answer your question technically, you can have as many routes as you like, and they can be as specific as you like. If you want to have a route defined for one page, you can. It wouldn't make sense to do that because we have something called static routes that I showed you very briefly. Static routes, if you have a page that's just static, you just drop it in there and it will find it and give it back. You don't have to write a route for it. But if you have like a route for a very complex query that is your code, you can have it this long and named exactly what you want, and it'll go directly to that route. The web server is nothing more than a traffic cop. It's up to you to do with that request what you will. Now, let's see a couple other variants, and then we'll start actually going through and writing some Node.js code. So this is a get, and how do we get to that route? How do we get that code to run? /P2. Under home or not under home? No, just the top level. Okay. What in the world happened there? I sent back a page, and in the page I had some JavaScript. That's all that happened. As a matter of fact, we're going to go look and see what happened there. This is actually the most complex example. Let's do P1. We'll come back to P2. What do you think is going to happen if I hit to P1?
Going to pop up a picture of whatever bank that you use.
Yep. Where is that? That's just a variable. You know JavaScript now, so it is relative assets path. Oh, it just says assets. And where is assets? Oh, there it is. There's my assets. And there's bang.jpg. So it's a picture. And we're saying, if you go to P1, let's go find the absolute path, send the file. There are functions here in nodes like here. I'm going to help you out. So with very little code, you can do some very powerful things. Okay? So it sent back an image, and the browser knows what to do with an image. It's not HTML, but it'll show the image. P2. Posted content. Okay. So the good news is we're down to the end of our route examples, and I'm enumerating here all the different things that you might want to do with routes. And it's important that you understand this. And it's important that you remember it. I don't often say that. Most of the time I say, forget all about it. You know, no problem. You have to remember this because ASP.NET MVC, they have routes too. Angular, they have routes too. Routing is a core concept of web development. So if you don't get it, practice it. Ask questions. So for P2, we did some complex things here. I want to explain, this is what's called a view model. So once again, we're going really fast here. The good news is if you learn this, the first 2 days of Paul's lectures about ASP.NET MVC and view models and routes, it's going to be, oh, I already know this. I know it from Node. So the concepts is what you need to focus on, not necessarily the syntax. What am I doing there? What's the syntax in JavaScript here?
You're creating a variable and saying that it's equal to this object.
I'm creating a new object variable. And what properties do I have?
Variable passed from action to.
It's a very long property name. On purpose to say you can name it whatever you want. You could have arrays. You could do whatever you want. This is just JSON. You know JSON. You've seen it. Now it says, this is a new statement. It says render P2, and we're passing in that variable. So we created a variable and we passed it to this render function. What is P2? By convention, it's going to be what they call a view. This is another very important server-side concept. The web server handles the routes. It runs your code, and 9 times out of 10, you want to give HTML or CSS back to the browser, right? Well, you don't want to have to write your HTML and CSS like I did up here. Nobody does that, right? That's like, no, that's horrible. Fortunately, developers are lazy. They make nice tools for themselves. So we're saying render P2. Under the views directory, this is one view engine language. So this, I wish I hadn't chosen Jade. This will be interpreted into HTML and CSS. It's like a shorthand. You know the stenographers in court where they have like a little shorthand? This is shorthand for rendering HTML. This is one variant. There are 4 different options in Node.js, at least 4, for a view engine. Let's go look at a couple. I'm not going to focus on Jade because it's my least favorite, because it looks least like HTML. It's like, what in the world's going on there? I don't like to look at that. It's very concise, and a lot of people love it. But what it's doing here, it says, you don't have to finish your tags. When you say H1, I just want to automatically, yeah, I'll figure it out. I'll create the end tag for you. Oh, and if you indent, it's like Python. Space matters. No, I'm not that disciplined. So some people love it.
Deprecated now too. I just looked it up.
Jade is deprecated?
It's called Pug now.
Pug? Yeah. Well, it's probably the same thing. That's the thing about open source. They like to change the name 3 times and confuse you. Kind of like Microsoft. So let's go over to, I think I used, okay, index.ejs. Here's another flavor of view engine. This looks, oh, that's HTML. I can understand what's going on. Except, what's different about this? Anybody know what those are called? Yes. Alligator brackets. Because it looks kind of like an alligator if you have an imagination. Alligator brackets. That's common in templating. This is an HTML file that you on the server side are spicing up with some dynamic content. You're not sending straight HTML. You're going to take variables and you're going to insert into your HTML from the server. So by the time the browser gets it, it's all flat, normal HTML and CSS. But this allows you from the server side, here's a variable. I want you to put my variable values in there. So why are we doing this? Anna was really anxious to get to running queries and sending data back to the browser. What we're going to do is we're going to get the web router request. We're going to say, what query should I run? Run the query, get the records back. We're going to do a for loop or something like that to loop through the records, and we're going to build something like a table in HTML. And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you can say, here's my array in JavaScript, and I'm going to render it to HTML like this. You have if statements. You have for loops, which is what we do to create table rows. You can just put variable values in there. Now, I'm introducing all kinds of concepts at the same time, and unfortunately I'm saying you have to remember all of it. You do. We're going to review it though. We're doing this all day long, and I've just gone through the whole spiel. So we're going to repeat it like 3 or 4 times, and you're going to do it. So you're going to get it.
Streams down.
Is it streamed back there? Yep. Okay, so it must be a Richmond problem. So don't worry if you don't understand all the syntax immediately. This is once again like day 1 with a brand new technology. Understand what a view does. Somebody explain back to me. Pretend I'm grandma. Grandma, what is a view?
A view model is a separate page written.
Not a view model. We'll get to view model in a minute. Just tell me what a view is.
A view is basically just what you see on the screen.
It's after it's been rendered, yes.
Right.
What is it before it's been rendered?
HTML.
Code?
It's HTML with some code sprinkled in. That's all a view is. Think of it as a template that you can generate, and you can define the code to generate. Good. Now what is a view model? You wanted to jump there, Scott. I don't think I've explained this, so it's kind of unfair to ask you. A view model is an object, most often an object, that you use to shuttle data from your route, your action, to your view. So, have you heard of MVC, Model View Controller? Okay? Model View Controller, so this is like your controller. I'm going to confuse a lot of people as I start using technical terms to explain what we're doing here. This is a function. This get function gets executed when the router says, they went to P2, code, tell me what to do when you go to P2. The view model is a variable that you defined so that you can pass it to your view. So here we're defining a variable, and we're passing it. When we say render, we're saying go run that view. giving it this variable. So we're passing a parameter of, here is your data. You only pass one. So think of it as a shuttle, like a shuttle bus at the airport. You throw, and each of the people on the shuttle bus would be people getting on the airplane. Those are properties in your object, in your view model. So the shuttle is like the object, the view model object, and each of the properties are like the people on the shuttle bus. The airplane, it's down here. It's in the view definition. So I hate looking at Jade. Let me use this. So down here in your alligator brackets, this is where those people, those properties on that view model, get off the bus, taking them to the airplane. It's like, oh, this is where you're going. Here's a property on my view model. So you have to use that shuttle bus to send all of your data in one big variable, which is why a view model is often an object with a bunch of properties on it. So think it's just one variable that you stuff a bunch of data into to give to your view, so that your view can look at it in these alligator brackets and render flat HTML, to Chris's point. By the time it gets to the browser, it's just flat HTML and CSS. So when does this run? This runs before the response is sent back from the URL. So when I ran this code over here, is it P2? It went that quick. And we can actually, because Node.js is so proud of its speed, it will actually, if I turn logging on, it'll say it took 10 milliseconds for it to do all of that. Everything we just explained, snap of the fingers. And it can handle thousands and thousands of concurrent requests. This is real technology. You could use this to build real sites, applications. Let's see what they're on about here. Okay, there's Richmond back. I went through all of Node.js technology in like half an hour, so you're going to be lost. Go take a break for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we'll come back, and we're going to go through questions, and we're going to start looking at the database side of things.